Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of the second book of Kings with chapter 14. That is Melachim Bet Perek Yud Dalid. In the last chapter, we read of the king Yehoash, the son of Yehoachaz, who was the king of the northern kingdom. And now, as we've seen the pattern, we go back and forth between relating the stories of the kings of the north to the kings of the south and back. Now we're going back to the south again, to the kingdom of Yehuda. And we are going to discuss the life and the career of the king Amatzyahu, or Amatzya. So Bishnas Shtayim, during the second year, Yoash ben Yoachaz melech Yisrael, of the king Yoash, the son of Yoachaz, the king of Israel, of the northern kingdom, Molach reigned the king Amatzyahu ben Yoash melech Yehuda. Amatzyahu, the son of Yoash, the king of Yehuda. So remember, his father's name Yoash, was also the same as the current king Yoash of Israel. He was 25 years old when he began his reign. He reigned for 29 years in Jerusalem. B'shem imo Yehoadon min Yerushalayim, and his mother's name was Yehoadon, and she was from Jerusalem. He did what was proper in the eyes of God. Rak loch gedavid aviv, but not as righteous as his forefather David. Kechol asher asa Yoash aviv asa. He did just as his father Yoash did. Now, remember, his father Yoash started off as a righteous king, and in the end wasn't so righteous anymore and had been assassinated. But the general thrust of his kingdom was a good kingdom, was one of bringing the people back towards God, and so was the kingship of Amatzyahu, or Amatzya. In what way was he not as good as King David, his ancestor? Because he wasn't so faithful to God, because even though he did not worship idols, but Rak Habamot Lo Saru, he did not take away the bamot, literally the high places, the places outside the temple where people would sacrifice. Od ha'am mizabchim u'makatrim b'mamot. The people were still bringing sacrifices and incense on these bamot, on these altars. Now, the presumption, the assumption that the verse is trying to give us the impression is that they were still worshiping God, but not all in the temple as they appropriately should have been, because as we know, as the Torah commands, sacrifices should only be brought in the temple itself. Vayehi, and it was ka'asher chazka ha'mamlacha biyado, as the kingdom became strong in his hands. Remember, Amatzya became king in the wake of a conspiracy that had killed his father. So he started in a very tenuous position, where, and in addition, the kingdom of Aram had attacked Jerusalem prior, so it was a very tenuous time, and his hold on the kingdom wasn't so strong. But over time, he strengthened his hand and had enough power, vayachet avadov, and he had executed his servants, hamakim et melech aviv, those that were responsible for the conspiracy against his father. However, and the next verse is going to bring a credit to Amatzya, although very often in those days when one king kills conspirators, they kill their whole family. However, he did not kill the descendants, the families of those that were responsible for the death of his father. Kakatuv b'sefer Torah Moshe, as it is written in the Sefer, in the book of the Torah given to Moshe, given to Moses, Asher Tziva Adonai, which is the book which was commanded by God himself, Lamar, which states as follows: Lo yumtu avot abonim uvanim lo yumtu alavot. One does not punish parents for the sins of their children, nor does one punish children for the sins of their parents. It's not justice to do that. Ki im ish bechet'o yumas. Rather, each person should die only as a result of his own transgressions. Now, so we get the impression of Amatzyahu, someone who is now becoming strengthened in his kingdom, and someone who is just. He put to death those responsible for the death of his father, but not their families. And then it states, "Hu he struck at Edom, the people of Edom, begay melach, in the valley of salt, aseret alafim, 10,000 soldiers, presumably, v'tofas et asela b'milchama." And he captured the Sela. Literally, it means the rock, or the large rock formation. At war, vayikra et shema Yokte'el, and he gave it a name, which a very distinct Hebrew Judite sound, Yokte'el adayom hazeh, which is his name until this day. Now, a couple things here that are important to note. One reason, we know from extra biblical sources that around this time, the Aram, who was the chief enemy of the people of Israel, had been eliminated as a threat, not by Israel, but by the rising power of Assyria. Assyria was beginning to rise and beginning to spread, and Assyria had conquered Aram at around approximately this time, and thus Aram was neutralized as a threat. And Assyria, at this point, was not yet continuing to threaten further into Israel or Judah. But as we know, in a few chapters from now, we're going to be reading about the ascent of the Assyrian Empire, and when the Assyrian Empire then becomes a threat, which is coming down the pike pretty soon, but not yet. So at this point, there's a power vacuum, and there's relative peace at the borders, so which gives Amatzyahu the ability to turn his attention to conquering other kingdoms that were a nuisance to them. So that's why he was able to attack Edom. Now, at this point, we're about to read one of the few places where the northern and southern kingdoms go to war against each other. There's a lot of detail missing here in the book of Kings, which is filled in, and we've seen this before several times, in the book of Chronicles. So, for example, this war against Edom originally was Amatzyahu had put together soldiers from the Judah's army to attack, and in order to bolster his strength, he brought 100,000 soldiers, mercenaries that he hired from the north, so that the northern king Yoash at the time lent him 100,000 soldiers for a price. In the Chronicles, it is said that so they would have cooperated together, but in Chronicles it says that the prophet of God said, "No, don't take the north with you, because remember, the north, those are idol worshippers. God is not with them. You don't need them fighting at your side." So he dismissed them. The northerners were very angry, and they ended up causing havoc in Judah, and when they returned, because they were angry that they were spurned away. Now, that sets the stage for what's about to happen. But interestingly, here, none of this is mentioned. So we don't know. If one would only read the book of Kings, and if you don't know that story, then all you know is what we're about to read. Oz sholach Amatzyahu malchim. In other words, after his victory over Edom, so he's riding high, Amatzyahu goes ahead and he sends messengers, El Yehoash ben Yehoachaz ben Yehu melech Yisrael, right? That's his entire lineage. Remember, he was a descendant of Yehu. This is the house of Yehu. The king of Israel. Lamar saying it's fire. L'chon Yisro'eh panim. Come, let us look each other in the face. Now, this could mean let's meet, let's be friendly, but it's generally understood by most of the commentaries that let's fight each other. But if you didn't know what I just told you from Chronicles, this would sound very strange. Why would Amatzyahu go ahead and attack and suggest that he wanted to attack uh, the northern kingdom. Like, why is he inviting him to a fight? It's just there's no context given here, but the context is given in the Book of Chronicles. So so that's the only way to understand this. Why he's angling for a fight. Otherwise, it would seem like, and it would be another way of understanding it, that Amatzia is simply being just being haughty and arrogant. I conquered them. Now I'm going to go conquer the northern kingdom. So, which would be a sign of a tremendous amount of such animosity between the northern and southern kingdoms that Amatzyahu viewed them as an enemy, just as he viewed the Edomites as an enemy. Even though a few generations ago they were intermarrying with each other and had peace with each other and were fighting together and making alliances. So by leaving out all these details, this verse becomes very difficult to understand. Vayishlach Yehoash, this is verse 9, Melech Yisrael, the king of Israel, sent El Amatzyahu Melech Yehuda, sent a message back to Amatzyahu, the king of Yehuda, Lamor, saying as follows. He starts with a kind of parable. HaChoach asher ba'Levanon, the choach, the thorn bush, which is growing in Lebanon, which could be translated as Lebanon, but it means in the forest. Shalach et el ha'erez, sent a message to the cedar tree, asher ba'Levanon lemar. So it seems to be comparing the people of Yehuda, the nation of Judah, to the thorn bush, and himself to the mighty cedar tree. And the message was, Tanoat bitcha livni li isha. Let's be friends. Give your daughter to me as a wife. Vata'avor chayat hasodeh asher ba'Levanon. But then the chayat hasodeh, the wild beast that was in the forest, vatirmos etzachoach, tore apart the thorn bush. Now, without the background from Chronicles, this thing doesn't make any sense. Like, if Yehoash, if Amatzya's message to the north was, let's fight, then why is the comparison in the parable to let's marry our children together, which is an alliance? It's a peaceful alliance. But if one looks at it with the background given in Chronicles, then it makes more sense because he's saying, you guys made you offered to make an alliance, right? But then, right, the Chayas HaSodeh went and tore up the thorn bush because his people, the troops that were spurned, went around rampaging in Judah out of their anger and tore up the people of Judah and exposed the weakness of the southern kingdom of Judah. So, and then he continues in verse 10 with this parable saying, Hakehi kisa es Edom. You just went ahead and struck down Edom, and you think you're so great. Your heart is now haughty. You think you're so great. He kaved v'shev b'veisecha. You should have just decided to stay at home, right? Take your honor and stay at home. Why are you pushing the evil? Why are you poking the bear, so to speak? Why are you trying to push this? V'nafalta, you're going to lose. Ata v'Yehuda imach, you and the people of Judah, of Yehuda with you, are all going to lose. So in other words, don't fight me, right? Just rest on your laurels of victory and sit with that because if you try to fight with me, I'm going to take you down. V'lo shama Amatzyahu did not listen. In other words, so they did meet in battle. Vayal Yehoash melech Yisrael vayisro panim. So in other words, Amatzyahu went, instigated the battle, brought his forces up north, and Yehoash went to meet him. Hu v'Amatzyahu melech Yehuda. The two of them met face to face b'Beit Shemesh asher Yehuda, in Beit Shemesh, which is on Judah's territory. So Amatzyahu massed his troops, and the northern kingdom, the people of Israel, the kingdom of Israel under the leadership of Yehoash, had already penetrated into Judean territory, and that's where the two armies met. Vayinogef Yehuda lefnei Yisrael, and the people of Yehuda, of Judah, were struck in front of the people of Israel. So the battle was a decisive victory for Israel, the Israelite kingdom. Vayanusu ish l'ohalav, and the armies scattered, and everyone ran to their homes for protection. Veit Amatzyahu melech Yehuda, and Amatzyahu, the king of Yehuda, ben Yehoash ben Achazyahu, the one who was the son of Yehoash, not the Yehoash that's currently fighting and leading the people of Israel, but the Yehoash that was the father of the king of Amatzyahu, the king of Yehuda. ben Achazyahu, Tofas Yehoash Melech Yisrael b'Beit Shemesh. Yehoash, the king of Israel, captured him in Beit Shemesh, where the major battle took place. Vayavo Yerushalayim, and then Yehoash led, after he captured the king, he came to Jerusalem, the capital, Vayifrotz b'chomatz Yerushalayim, and he broke through the walls of Jerusalem, Bishar Ephraim at Shar Hapina Arba Me'as Ama, in the gate of Ephraim, to the corner gate. He broke a hole open 400 amos wide, so that would be somewhere around 600 feet wide hole, a huge breach in the wall. And then it went, of course, and pillaged the city. V'lokachet kol hazahav v'akesef, and he took all of the gold and silver, v'yet kol hakelim, and all of the vessels hanimtzeim beit Adonai that were found in the temple of God, uve'otzrot beit hamelach, and in the temple, in the king's treasury, v'eit bnei ha'ta'aruvos, and the hostages. The question is, who exactly these hostages are? We presume maybe these were the hostages that had been taken by the king would hold the princes. What people understood this to mean, the princes that were held in the king's house, so that their fathers should not rebel against the king. Remember, this is in a way to prevent another coup. So they took these bnei ta'aruvos vayoshav Shomrona and took them all back to Shomron, to Samaria, where the capital of the northern kingdom Israel was. So this was a terrible disaster, and to think that all of this pillaging took place at the hands of the people of Israel is just a fearsome, awful thought. But this is what happened. This is what this jealousy led to, and this terrible war between brothers. It's hard to call it a civil war because they were two separate kingdoms, but it was a war between the Israelites and the Judahites, who were brothers, cousins, if not brothers. V'yeser divrei Yehoash asher aso gvuraso. And all of the other actions of Yehoash, the king of Israel, and his might, his victories, Vasher Nilcham, and that battle which he had in Amatzyahu Melech Yehuda, with Amatzyahu, the king of Yehuda, Haloim Kisuvim al Sefer Divrei HaYamin L'Malchei Yisrael. They are written in the book of Chronicles for the kings of Israel. Vayishkav Yehoash Avosav. So this again is this is the second time we're recording the death of Yehoash. He died, and Vayikaver b'Shomron, he was buried in Samaria, in Malchei Yisrael, together with the kings of Israel. Vayimloch Yeravam beno tachtav. And Yeravam, his son, became king after him. But now, Vayechi Amatzyahu ben Yoash melech Yehuda, Achrei Mos Yehoash ben Yehoachaz melech Yisrael, 15 shana. Amatzyahu, the son of Yoash, the king of Yehuda, the one who had been captured in that battle, he continued on to live after his captor, Yehoash, had passed on. He continued to live for 15 years. It would seem to indicate that possibly upon the death of Yoash he was released, but this isn't clear. This isn't being written in the verses clearly, but that's the impression one would get from this verse, but it's not clearly written. V'yeser divrei Amatzyahu, and the remaining words, the things that happened, or the things that Amatzyahu had done, Elohim Kesuvim, behold, they are written, al Sefer Divrei Hayamim, in the book of Chronicles, the Malchei Yehuda, of the kings of Yehuda. So the story continued, and the impression is given that Amatzyahu continued to reign. Again, here the book of Chronicles fills in some details, which is that Amatzyahu turned to idol worship and worshipped the idols of Edom, the country from which he had crushed in battle at Selah, which we mentioned before. And it seems to be that arrogance that led him to instigate a battle with the north, that arrogance also led him to idol worship, which, as we've seen so many times, the tie between arrogance and idol worship is such a deep, deep connection. Vayikshru of Kesher b'Yushalayim. And Amatzyahu, after having lost this tremendous battle to the north, of course his prestige is crushed, and now he's also worshiping foreign idols. So again, this leads to another conspiracy. Just as his father, there was a conspiracy, so there's a conspiracy against him, and he ended up having to run from the capital to try to escape for his life from the conspirators. Vayanos Lachisha, he ran to another major city, Lachish, a major city in Judah. Vayishluchu acharav Lachisha, vayimisuhu sham, and they sent a group of people after him to chase him to Lachish, and they ended up finding him and killing him there. Vayesuo so al asusim, they carried his body back on horses. Vayikaver b'Yerushalayim im Abosov b'Ir David, and he was buried with his ancestors, the other kings of Judah, in the city of David. Vayikhu kol am Yehuda et Azariah, the people of Israel took Azariah, v'hu ben sheish esrei shana, that's his son of Amatzyahu. He was 16 years old. Vayamlichu oso tachas aviv Amatzyahu, and they made him king in place of his father Amatzyahu. So the line of the Judean kings continues. Even though they killed Amatzyahu, they put his son in power, which is similar to how Amatzyahu himself came into power. Hu bana et Eilat, he built the city of Eilat. Vayishivehel Yehuda, and he returned that city, which apparently had been conquered by another nation. Acharei, presumably Edom, the Edomites. Acharei shechav hamelach im Abosav, he did that after the king, meaning Amatzyahu, his father, had passed on to, so to speak, rest with his forefathers. So this concludes the career of Amatzyahu, and we were now introduced to the next king of Judah, Azariah, and sometimes called Azaryahu. And after this, we'll conclude here with 14a, and after this, we are going to go back and focus on the next king of Israel, Jeroboam, which we'll get to in the next podcast. Thank you so much for studying this together with me. Looking forward to studying the rest of chapter 14 and, of course, the rest of the book of Kings together.